Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today, I want to talk about why feminists are losing the future. They are pushing an anti-natalist agenda that is going to lead to the ideology's own annihilation. They aren't reproducing enough future feminists to carry the mantle of feminism forward. So it's like a self-defeating ideology. And I don't know about you, I don't ever want to be on a losing team. So just seeing how feminism is progressing, where it's left millennial women in particular, and in terms of dating and relationships and marriage, and the direction it's going, because feminists are encouraging other women not to reproduce. It's clearly a losing value proposition. So I want to dive into this piece by Kate Mann on Substack. Just for some background, Kate Mann is a faculty at the Sage School of Philosophy at Cornell University, and she is in the Feminist Gender and Sexuality Studies program. So if there's ever a reason to defund schools like Cornell, this is probably it right here. I think everything she espouses is a luxury belief, targeted not for people like her, but for other women, and you'll see that later on as we go through this piece. So let's dive in. So this woman argues that women should not have children or more children under the current administration. So this is specifically about Donald Trump, and she argues that there's no reason that women should be having children right now. She says, maybe don't have children or more children whatsoever. You are not being selfish. You are acting in your own self-interest. So she is, there's people that on the left who have argued not to have children for a variety of reasons. There's the economic argument, it costs too much. There's the environmental argument and people who believe that overpopulation is happening. And so to be good stewards of the environment, we should pull back on the number of people we're producing. But this woman is making that argument for a political social narrative. We shouldn't have children because of Donald Trump, which is just mind-boggling to me. So she lays out 5 reasons in this essay why women shouldn't have children. So the first argument she makes is pregnancy is far more dangerous than it ought to be. She argues the U.S. has the worst maternal mortality rate of any developed nation, with an estimated 80% of maternal deaths being preventable. So I went through and kind of asked ChatGPT to parse through this. The U.S. has the highest maternal mortality rate of any developed country. Why is this the case? And so ChatGPT gave me a couple factors which I think are noteworthy. So it talks about the health system and access to coverage, which clearly is a problem. It talks about pre-existing conditions, structural problems, and data classification. So the first, the health system, of course, we all know the health system sucks. Health insurance is awful. That being said, there are plenty of publicly funded clinics or clinics that claim to be pro-woman, aka Planned Parenthood. Even though they're not, they claim to be. But there's a lot of infrastructure in place, both religious entities that are anti-abortion that want to see women succeed in having children, and then other more secular feminist ones as well that claim to not be abortion focused. But in order for them to do so, they would also have to provide maternal services. So that's all I'll say. There's a bunch of healthcare services, especially for low-income people, outside of the health insurance system, and so they're it might not be great, but there's access to services. But I would note here that it talks about especially postpartum, and I think this is the case, and this is where there's some nuance here. It's not necessarily that women are dying at a higher rate in the West and in developed countries because they're getting pregnant. I think there's a lot on the back end. Women don't get the care they need after they deliver. And I think this is one of the failings of, a highly capitalistic medical system. And I'm, a big fan of capitalism, but that also, things in excess or things applied inappropriately can also be harmful. Water's good. Water is essential for your health. If you drink too much water in a short period of time, you can drown your cells in your body and kill yourself, right? So anything in excess is bad. And I think when it comes to capitalism, it's been grossly applied in the medical industry and in healthcare, and it's just gotten out of control. And you see this with the absence of postpartum care. It's women go into hospitals treat pregnant mothers like baby making machines. It's funny that feminists complain about men treating women as baby making factors, but really it's the healthcare system that does that. Like, they want to schedule as many pregnancies as possible, in and out, and so the goal isn't to keep you in, to monitor you, to make sure that you're okay after you deliver and give birth. It's to clear your room, clear your bed, so that they can get the next woman in. And so this puts a lot of women at risk. And this is why there are fatalities post delivery. Because there isn't as sufficient follow-up on your health and well-being, especially if you have an infection and develop sepsis after you give birth. And so there certainly are some risks there. But more importantly, this notes pre-existing conditions. And this is something that I think is important, especially if you look at the current health climate we live in. Americans are morbidly obese. The vast majority of Americans are morbidly obese, have chronic conditions, have a lot of issues. And so you have to, this is a problem. And this gets to the other point that ChatGPT raised here at the bottom with data classification. It's hard to know of this claim that she's making here, that 80% maternal deaths being preventable. It's hard to know what percentage of those deaths are attributed to actually preventable problems during pregnancy, and what portion of those deaths are a result of comorbidity factors. And we saw this during COVID, right? And this is one of the big critiques about the data from COVID-19 pandemic is you had people who got sick with COVID, ended up in the hospital, but they also had a series of other comorbidities. So maybe they were older, maybe they were obese, maybe they had a chronic disease that put them more at risk. A whole host of problems. But the way the data was coded is if you died of COVID, that's how you were categorized because it benefited the hospital system. I believe there was like reimbursements that were going to the hospital systems for people who died from COVID. And so it was a way for hospitals, frankly, to make money. And so this is one of the problems just in terms of health data writ large. Like, there's no standard system for coding, for parsing through different variables and coding things correctly. Like, look at elderly people. This is a really good example also to illustrate this point. Like, how many times, and I've known grandparents who this has happened to, like I'm sure you might know people too, how many times has an elderly person gone to the hospital because they fell and broke their hip, and 3 weeks later they're dead because of pneumonia, right? So they didn't, they'll say they died from one thing and they came to the hospital for another thing. And so it's really hard to parse through some of this data. And so yes, maternal deaths may be increasing, but we don't know necessarily why they're increasing. And that's just because there's a lot of, there's just a lot, it's just not, the data isn't really clear on how these deaths are happening and what can actually be attributed to them. Like what percentage of these maternal deaths are morbidly obese women or women with a certain chronic condition like heart disease or diabetes. Like, we just don't know that information. So I think it's disingenuous to say that it's far more dangerous than it ought to be if we don't know the demographic group or the cohort of people that is mostly being impacted by this increase in maternal deaths. Okay, so she goes on to claim that in red states, maternal mortality has worsened sharply across the board in the wake of the 2022 Dobbs decision. So that was the decision that repealed Roe v. Wade. Again, it's hard to, like, I don't know how the claim she's making here. She's not offering any sort of evidence to back this up. And then she concludes this section by talking about, in states like Texas, the risk of sepsis is skyrocketing as a result of second trimester miscarriages, where the fetus is dying but still has a heartbeat. And I really wanted to call this out because, one, I live in Texas, so this is near and dear to my heart. But I think this goes to show, like, how data is manipulated to fit certain narratives. So since the Texas abortion ban went into place the past couple of years, only 3 women have died from sepsis. And I don't want to diminish those deaths, right? Like those were wives and mothers and sisters and daughters, and their lives mattered. I don't want to say that their lives didn't matter. But there's about 388,500 on average women who give birth in Texas per year. So 3 women dying out of, more than 250,000 giving birth in the state of Texas isn't a statistically significant number. And again, there's other variables that could have impacted their ability to get the right care that would have saved their lives. Like we just don't know, who these women were, what hospitals they went to, the quality of care they were getting at those hospitals, medical errors. So I was looking this up, and there's 2 different competing data sets, but medical errors and accidents, depending on where you look, are the 3rd leading cause of death in the United States. So it's well known that you can go into the hospital for a routine thing and wind up in a body bag because of a whole slew of errors and problems and things outside of your control. So I say this because I don't necessarily know that being pregnant is more dangerous than existing. Like so long as you exist, there's always going to be risk. Anytime you walk outside your front door, every time you get into a car, there's going to be a risk. Anytime you set foot into a hospital, there's going to be added risks. Like, yes, you can hope and pray that the team that's in charge of your care is going to give you the best care they can, but mistakes do happen, intentionally or not, and you could be, on the negative receiving end of that, and that's the reality of life. And I don't want to make light of, obviously women dying of sepsis in Texas, but I think this data point is being manipulated and skewed to fit a narrative like, oh, Roe v. Wade was overturned, Texas banned abortions, therefore more women are dying. And I don't necessarily know if that's actually the case. I don't think that this data necessarily proves that. Okay, and then so she goes on to say, somehow women and other people who can get pregnant, only women can get pregnant, let's be honest here, are expected to just wear these risks and not factor them into our decisions about whether or not to have a baby. Like I said, there's all sorts of different risks. Everything you do is a risk. So either you resign yourself to living a life in a bubble and you don't do anything, or you accept the risks, you do what you can to mitigate them. In the case of, health and wellness, diet and exercise. Other than that, like, you have conditions in the world around you. You have to figure out how to navigate in them. And that's kind of what it is. And I don't think, telling women not to have children because there's risks is the right answer. Like, if you're going to tell women that, then tell them to stop driving too, because there's a ton of risk in driving. Far more people die in car accidents every year than, maternal or pregnancy complications. Okay, so the next next point she makes is men do not help nearly enough, and having children is why and when women find themselves with a second shift problem. So I've talked about this in other videos, but the idea that women disproportionately carry a far greater burden when it comes to taking care of children. So these women work 9-to-5 jobs, they have careers, and they come home, and then taking care of their kids becomes second shift. So it's like a part-time job, and they feel tremendously burdened by that. And she says, despite flattering perceptions of involved fathers, the second shift problem hasn't budged in 25 years, where on average, he will do less than half the childcare and housework compared to a female partner when both partners work full-time. And I've debunked that in some other videos. I have a feminist playlist that I'll link in the description. You can go and watch some of those videos. But all of this is just complete malarkey. Like, men do a tremendous amount in the home. It's not that they're not doing anything. It's just the role they play is different. And I think feminist women expect men to meet them at their level. Like, they don't realize relationships are 2 people coming together, and there's compromise and people have roles to play. They just expect men to mold to their needs and their wants and their expectations of reality. And for them, I don't know what women want. Like, if you have a man that does 100% of pays 100% of the bills and does 100% of the household chores, like, I think these women would still find something to complain about. They would still nag, they would still nitpick. So I don't even know if doing more would placate them, which is the crazy part. So she says women acquire vastly more in the way of household responsibilities after having children. Many studies show men somehow doing less after the arrival of his firstborn. Okay, first off, this is a college professor at an Ivy League university, and her writing is atrocious. Just like the grammatical structuring, the punctuation, the uppercasing of letters. Oh my gosh, like this is just absolutely horrible. It boggles my mind. This woman's probably making six figures, talking about nonsense. She's in the feminist and gender studies department. She has the Substack, and she's over 24,000 subscribers, so she's probably making a decent chunk of change here. And she can barely write. It's astounding to me. But anyways, she says men end up doing less after the arrival of their firstborn, and this just ignores the realities of biology, right? I think there's a lot of men, a lot of first-time dads who would love to do more, and they simply can't. There's a special bonding relationship that happens between mother and infant. Mother is provider, mother is nurturer, mother literally weans child, provides food. Like, yeah, at some point you'll be able to bottle feed a baby, right? And they'll, be able to start eating table food and that kind of stuff. But, during those first, couple months, like, baby and mama are one. There's not very much that the man can do. And I think, a lot of guys feel helpless and would love to be able to do more. And they recognize that there's not much they can do. And this is what people don't understand is like, yeah, okay, during the newborn period, the women do disproportionately more, sure. But then look at the trajectory of a kid's life, okay? So think about like teenage years. Who's the disciplinarian? Who's the one that's role modeling? Who's the one that's, being a coach, softball coach, or leading a Cub Scout den, or who's the one that's playing that role, right? Dad, usually. Like dad plays a role too, and maybe mom takes a step back at certain points in time. But there's ebbs and flows in the raising of children. It's not just what happens during the first couple months is stasis throughout an entire child's life. Like it's a team sport. And the fact that these women don't understand that is mind-boggling to me. Like there are realities of biology, and there are certain roles women need to play in the first, couple years, especially of a child's life. And then at some point they'll be able to tag team and like pass it off to dad, right? At some point the kid is going to be old enough where dad can go play catch with the kid in the backyard. Dad can help take, a little girl to a ballet class, or can volunteer, or can do stuff, right? So there's give and take, and it's not just this like fixed state where women are always doing more. It's just they harp on the first few years, and they act like this is a punishment when it's just a factor and a reality of biology. Okay. She says a male partner typically won't do his fair share of demanding and constant labor for caring of a newborn. Again, like a lot of dads want to do what they can, and you can't control if the baby wants mom, or if the baby's hungry and needs mom, like that's just the reality of it. But one of the things like she doesn't talk about here as well, aside from the biology, is that like dad is financing things and paying for things and making sure the house is stable and you have a place to live. So yeah, okay, maybe dad isn't able to fulfill all the needs all at once, but it's not like he's not playing a role, and it's not like he's not playing his fair share. If you're in a married relationship and the husband carries the burden of making sure the mortgage is paid, keeping the lights on, like making sure you're safe, you're especially like making sure you have a house in a safe neighborhood, like if he's doing all of that, like you can't just discount that. And that's what a lot of these women do. They say they don't do their fair share of the demanding and constant labor, when in fact they do. They do a lot. They're the ones, like if you just had a baby, like you can't work for, a period of time. So he's the one making sure like you guys can stay afloat, if you were on your own having a baby, it'd be a lot more difficult. So I think men definitely deserve some credit here, that their contribution is going to look different, of course, but to say that they're not contributing at all is a disservice to men. So okay, oh sorry, I skipped over, this was the third one. The heterosexist norms within relationships mean mothers don't get cared for, and that's why it's like the load and the burden, and this leads to all sorts of things later on, postpartum depression, that kind of thing. Okay, so the fourth one is social support is nil to non-existent. After birth, did you enjoy attentive and frequent follow-up medical care, free physical therapy, government provided classes and home visits for infant care support, and extended paid medical leave? Nope, me neither. Okay, I get this frustration. Okay, I get it. I went through several weeks of physical therapy for running because I had an injury I was working through and I had to pay all of it out of pocket. I get it. It's frustrating. It sucks. That being said, I don't necessarily think wanting to depend on Uncle Sam to provide everything for you is a reason to not have children, especially because a lot of these feminist women have given up the social support system that did previously exist, that they no longer have access to. And so what I mean by that is a lot of feminist women went to college, got these bullshit degrees and all these credentials, and then they moved to big cities like New York and LA and Washington and San Francisco, and they work these big girl 9-to-5 girl boss jobs, and then they wonder why it's hard to raise a child. They've divorced themselves and geographically separated themselves from the social safety net that they previously had access to, and that's community, that's family. I'll give you a great example. So my best friend had her first child about a year ago. She stayed at home, didn't leave. Both her and her husband are native to the area. Their family's still there, but she's basically like family to my family, and so. Not only does she have, the grandparents on his side of the family and her own mother, like my mother is constantly over there helping out. And so she's got all sorts of grandparents and aunties and uncles who are happy to take care of, help take care of the baby. Before the baby came, she had, I think, at least 3 or 4 baby showers, just different groups of people in her life, coworkers, church people, all sorts of people just willing to help her, giving her a baby shower. Being there as support. Even when I recently got married, and even that, like my mom helped tremendously with planning that, and almost everything from the vendors we used to chairs and decorations and all that came from my mom's church. Okay, like we didn't hire stuff out. We didn't have a fancy venue or a coordinator. We borrowed a lot of stuff and did it ourselves. And that's what's missing here is these feminist women expect the social safety, like the government to step in and provide everything that they've left behind by moving away from their families and moving away from their homes. And then they're grossly disappointed when, 1, Uncle Sam doesn't step up to the plate to provide for them, but 2, capitalist enterprises do, and they charge out the wazoo. And childcare is a really good example of this. Like, childcare doesn't have to be as expensive as it is. I mean, again, I understand there's some people have to work in certain cities based on their jobs. They might not have access to, cheaper, affordable options. I get it. There's a whole slew of reasons. Everyone's impacted differently. I get this. But at the same time, there are also, people who deliberately seek out really expensive childcare because they want the best for their kids. And, I get that too. Or they choose to live in an expensive city like New York, while only making $60,000 a year, knowing full well that their salary does not afford them the privilege of living there. And at some point, you have to grow up and recognize like a spade is a spade, and make a choice, make an adult decision. Do you stay in a city that you can't afford to raise a child in, or do you leave? And I would say the adults tend to leave, and the adult children who have not grown up tend to stay, and then they complain that everything's super expensive. And so this is the reality of it. Like, the social support system does exist. If you left it and you left it behind, like, that's on you. Okay. And if the caveat to this too, it's like, you left it behind. Okay. I get that. But if you haven't tried to rebuild it either, right? A lot of, and feminists and specifically like millennial women, their idea of community is going to a Soul Cycle class or, joining a pickleball league. Like, that's not community, okay? Like, those people are not going to be the people. Those are the people that you will call if you want someone to go to brunch with or someone to go out, on a Saturday night downtown. Those aren't the people who you can call in a pinch to come look after your kid because something happened at work, or, someone to cover for you, in case you have to go pick up your kid because they're sick from school or whatever. Like, that's not your community, okay? Communities are usually coming from churches, neighbors, other civic groups you might be part of, that kind of thing. And so if you've moved yourself from your hometown, you've divorced yourself from the community that you came from, and then you haven't done the work to establish a new community in the place you live, and then you're complaining that you don't have any social support, like, that's on you. It's not Uncle Sam's job to help you be an adult. It's your job, and you need to figure out how to make it work. And yeah, there are certain things about our system that sucks. Like I said, the healthcare system isn't great. We all know this. And none of us are going to change it anytime soon. So you're better off figuring out how to navigate within the parameters of the conditions that you're living in. Shaking your fists and trying to fight the system, I don't think is going to do you much good at this point. And telling people not to have kids because of the healthcare system or the lack of free childcare, it is, again, anti-natalist, and it's anti-life. It's like, then what's the point? What's the point in doing anything? If you're going to give up on that, like, what's the point? So the fifth one, again, childcare. She says ludicrously expensive and often unavailable and unreliable. And here she talks about, like, you read through this and it's like, okay, she doesn't want to take responsibility of raising her own kid. So she says, until your child is approximately 5 years old and they can be enrolled in a public school, you are likely to pay through the nose in this country for childcare. Childcare is also quite reasonably not an option when your child is sick, as they will be constantly for at least the first year of exposure to other children. Childcare is off the menu during weekends and at least a fair number of school and federal holidays too. This costs many women their jobs and many others their productivity and likelihood of being able to earn promotions and raises. Like, what's your goal in life here? Like, this really clearly frames the feminist narrative. Do you want to be a mother? Do you want to be a wife? Or do you want to be a worker bee? Do you want to climb the corporate ladder, which, oh, by the way, is rapidly disappearing, in case people haven't been paying attention? Like, this is all about priorities. This isn't about childcare. Like, I think childcare is a symptom of misplaced priorities. And this goes back to what I was saying before. Like, if something is really important to you and you've done the work to cultivate a social network, like, you're going to have people who are going to help you and make sure, things are okay. You're going to have options. If you're just relying on whatever cookie cutter, brick and mortar, private equity owned, childcare chain is closest to your work, and they're charging out the wazoo, and you don't want to take care of your kid on weekends or deal with them when they're sick, like, that's on you. Like, that's on you as a parent. You're clearly not meant to be a parent. But to implore young women to not have children because of your own misplaced priorities is just terrible. And this is what these feminist women have been doing. They've been telling other women not to have children because their own priorities are more aligned with their careers than anything else. And I think Gen Z sees the writing on the wall, hopefully, that career isn't everything. Money isn't everything. There's more to life than climbing a career ladder. And, you have to pick and choose. And at some point, you're going to have to choose between your starting a family or having a career. And it's not like it's a zero-sum game for the rest of your life. Like, at some point, your kids will grow up and you can, go back to doing career or start a business or whatever. But there's going to be a period of time where you have to raise kids. And that's just a fact of life. And if you don't want to do that, that's on you. That's not a reason to tell people not to have children. Okay, so the end of this essay is the cherry on top. So she lays out 5 reasons why women should not have children. And then she concludes this essay by talking about how she herself is a mother. So she says, I am going to include the inevitable caveat. I have a child myself, and I love her more than anyone or anything. I am so glad I had her under the last Trump administration, just before COVID hit, for the record. However, 2 points. My situation was very unusual. I had secure employment in the form of a tenured position as a professor, stellar health insurance, could afford to take the career and pay hit, and most unusually of all, a male partner who I trusted to do at least 50% of the childcare, an agreement which he has happily more than made good on. So this entire essay, she's said that the healthcare system sucks, which it does, and that's a reason why women shouldn't have children. She says that men are terrible, men don't do their fair share, and that's the reason why women shouldn't have children, women shouldn't have children. She talked about, the social safety network and childcare, and that's why women shouldn't have children. But she herself was able to have a children, and she frames her own position as unique and unusual, but in reality, it's not. Like, she's not special. She's average. She's not like I can't imagine, a college professor making crazy amounts of money. I mean, I'm sure they make enough to live off of, right? But I think she's like average in terms of the, number of people in this country making, households making, the amount of money she is. So what she's talking about and what a lot of these women do is she's setting an example. She's saying rules for thee, not for me. And she's talking down to feminist women beneath her socioeconomically. So this doesn't apply to her, right? Because she's in her unusual special position. Everything's good and hunky-dory. But for other women who might not be as advantaged as her, other women who might not have, a male partner, who knows if it's her husband, she doesn't disclose that, but do not have support, like they shouldn't have kids, but it's okay if she has a kid. It's just the hypocrisy there. It's on full display. Like, you can't write an entire essay telling women not to have children and then say, oh, by the way, I have a child and I ignored all these rules. And it's clear, like, how can the patriarchy be the problem if you're married to part of the patriarchy, right? Or if she has a partner who's part of the, like, she says men don't do enough support, but her man does. And she expects that to be unusual. Like, there's a lot of really good men out there. And it's feminists like her that keep, disparaging them and degrading them in the public sphere and in culture. And it's clearly not the case. Like, and she says she even had her first child during the last Trump administration. So clearly, I mean, the kid is still alive and doing well. Like, Trump didn't, cause problems then. Like, why is this time different? So the hypocrisy is on full display. So she goes on to say, another point, even if this didn't apply, it's perfectly possible to recognize that we love our children and that it was a huge risk, even potentially a mistake to have them in the first place. Yes, even if we are glad that we made that particular mistake, and even if the gamble worked out beautifully. Like, I feel so bad for her kid. I think she has a daughter. I feel so bad if her daughter reads this someday and it's like, oh, I was a mistake. What kid wants to be told they're a mistake? And this kind of goes with some of the data stuff I was talking about in the beginning. Like, okay, so it worked out for her and it was a gamble, but everything worked out beautifully. What percentage of women do you think things work out just fine for? Probably the majority. Like, there's a minority of women who do have complications, who aren't in good marriages, who have really poor health insurance, who can't make things work, and who are struggling, right? But these feminist women latch on to minority problems and they raise them up as if they're the norm, as if they're the standard. And it's something they're trying to make the rest of us fearful of. So again, the sepsis cases in Texas, a very small minority of women have had complications that may be attributed to the abortion ban. But that's not necessarily indicative of all women having births in the state of Texas. The vast majority of women are doing just fine, having healthy babies, people are thriving. And so I hate how she casts it like this, because she makes it seem like it's a risk and they got lucky, which, being able to conceive in and of itself is a gift, and there is some luck to it, sure. But to say that it was a mistake and it worked out beautifully, it suggests like the vast majority of births don't, and that's not true. Like, the vast majority of births, women have been giving birth for millennia. Like, things have gone fine, right? Things have gotten better over the years, sure, but people are still carrying on. And to suggest that there's like a disproportionate amount of risk that disproportionately affects a majority of people, really casts a shadow on the whole aspect of becoming a mother. And it makes people not want to be mothers, because why would you want to take the risk? And the people who are consuming this content, they're not understanding the data manipulation, how it's shaping the narrative, and that the risk isn't actually as big as they make it seem out to be. So the the creme to the creme of this, the last sentence, she says, a note to her daughter. She writes this in the end, that in the unlikely event you're reading this years from now, I hope you don't give me grandchildren. How horrible. Like, the vast majority of mothers want to have grandchildren. They can't wait for grandbabies. And this woman's like, I wish I hadn't had you. You are a happy and beautiful mistake. It worked out okay, but in retrospect, I wish I didn't have you. And oh, by the way, please don't give me any grandchildren. And this is why the Feminist Project is going to lose, because the women who are consuming this, they're internalizing this and they're becoming fearful of motherhood. And I can speak from experience, because I was in this pool of people for a very long time, where I was afraid of motherhood and I thought it was going to be the end of everything. And I believed all these talking points and really internalized them. And it's absolute and utter nonsense. None of it is true. But you have women like this who continue to espouse to other women, those socioeconomically beneath them, typically, not to have children, that children are dangerous and bad. And then she doesn't want whatever children do exist who are being born to feminist households to have their own children. So they don't want grandchildren. So eventually feminism is going to have to die out. Like, there's no way to keep this project going unless feminists are replacing themselves with more feminists. And if you read like some of the comments here, it's a bunch of older millennial women talking about how validated they feel reading this, just because they chose to be childless by choice, and they didn't want to have children, and so the values these women hold politically and socially are already, I think, minority opinions, but they're about to become even more of minority opinions because they're not reproducing. And just to give you a glimpse in what the future holds, I think it's really good to look at reproduction rates, not just like at a national level, but by religious communities within a population. So this is the average number of children for 35 to 45-year-olds in the United States, broken down by religion. And as you can see, that the national average is 2.6. I think I Googled replacement rate is about 2.1. So you need to have two-ish kids per family in order to replace baby boomers who will be dying off soon, and then Gen X to follow. So you need to have that number to replace the population that is dying out. So there are only 5 categories of people here who are doing that. So you got Mormons, Muslims, Orthodox Christians, Protestants, and Catholics. So you got Mormons, Muslims, and Christians who are the only ones who are reproducing at high enough rates to replace them. And so eventually, anyone who's not reproducing at replacement level is going to become a minority. And so their worldview and their opinions are going to become minority opinions. So if Mormons and Christians and Muslims are the only ones who are reproducing above replacement rate, this is going to be what the future looks like. The values of these religions, and these people tend to skew more conservative politically, but the value of these religions are going to be the norm in the future. And so there's not going to be a place for feminism. I mean, Mormonism and Islam in particular definitely have very strict and defined roles for women. I think there's a little bit more flexibility in the Christian denominations, but definitely Mormonism and Muslims, there is no room for for feminism and the strict interpretations of those religions. And so there's no way for feminists to carry on into the future. Like, they're going to eventually die out. And so, you have to look at where you are today and I think ask a very logical and obvious question. Like, what's the point of choosing a losing team? If the team you have joined, like, isn't reproducing to create progeny for the future, what's the point? What's the point of being part of that team? And I think rational, logical women who are still of childbearing age, I think should really ask that question. Like, what does feminism offer all of these future childless cat ladies? You look 10, 15, 20 years from now, what is feminism going to offer these women? And I don't think it's going to be anything. I think it's set them up for failure. So this is, yeah, like I said, this was an essay on why not to have children. I think it's horribly flawed in its logic, and this is really concerning that these are the type of people who are teaching in Ivy League universities in America, receiving public taxpayer dollars to do all sorts of research that they're doing and subsidies for the work they're doing. I think this is a terrible example of not a terrible example. I mean, it's what's expected, right? But this is what academia is producing. So no wonder why you have a bunch of angry, raging feminist Gen Zers running around college campuses, because this is what they're being told. If you enjoyed this analysis, I would love it if you would like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.